Karoline Leavitt was your average college freshman, or so everyone thought. She had a quiet confidence about her, the kind that didn't demand attention but still made people curious. At just 18, she'd already developed a love for numbers and equations, something most of her peers couldn't relate to. While others groaned at the sight of math homework, Karoline dove into it like it was a treasure map waiting to be decoded. Her high school teachers often joked that she might one day solve problems no one else could. But here's the thing. Karoline wasn't interested in showing off. She preferred staying under the radar, letting her work speak for itself. This semester, however, things were different. Karoline found herself sitting in a calculus class taught by Dr. Adrian Monroe, a man whose reputation preceded him. He was known across campus as both brilliant and terrifying. With piercing eyes and a voice that could cut through steel, he took pride in pushing his students to their limits. Some thrived under his intensity, many crumbled. To Dr. Monroe, education wasn't just about teaching, it was about weeding out those who lacked grit. And when he spotted Karoline sitting quietly in the back row, jotting down notes without raising her hand or asking questions, something about her demeanor rubbed him the wrong way. To him, silence meant disengagement, it meant laziness. So naturally, he decided to put her on the spot. One afternoon, during a particularly grueling lecture on integrals, Dr. Monroe suddenly stopped mid-sentence. The room fell silent as all eyes turned toward him. Without warning, he strode over to where Karoline sat, his presence looming large. "You," he said sharply, pointing at her. "Since you're so busy taking notes, maybe you'd care to explain this problem to the rest of us." His tone wasn't encouraging, it was challenging. The entire class froze, watching to see how Karoline would react. Slowly, she stood up, clutching her notebook. Her heart pounded, not because she didn't know the answer, but because every pair of eyes in the room was now fixed on her. Taking a deep breath, she walked to the front of the classroom. The equation on the board looked tricky, even for someone with experience, but Karoline didn't flinch. Picking up a piece of chalk, she began working through the problem step by step, her movement steady and precise. Each line she wrote brought murmurs of surprise from her classmates. Within minutes, she turned to face Dr. Monroe, having solved the integral perfectly. Instead of praising her, though, Dr. Monroe narrowed his eyes. Clearly, he hadn't expected her to succeed so easily. Rather than admit defeat, he smirked. "Not bad," he said dryly. "But let's see if you can handle something harder." With that, he erased the original problem and replaced it with another, one far more complicated. This time it involved multiple layers of variables and required advanced techniques that most freshmen wouldn't have encountered yet. Gasps echoed around the room as students exchanged glances, wondering why their professor seemed determined to embarrass Karoline. But Karoline didn't back down. Once again, she approached the board, her mind racing through possibilities. "Piece you at?" By piece, she unraveled the problem, breaking it down until the solution became clear. When she finished, the room erupted into applause. Even some of her classmates cheered, impressed by her skill. Dr. Monroe, however, remained unmoved. If anything, his expression grew darker. Instead of congratulating her, he simply dismissed the class early, muttering something about needing to prepare for the next lesson. What started as a simple challenge quickly escalated into something bigger. Over the following weeks, Dr. Monroe made it his mission to test Karoline at every opportunity. Whether it was calling her out during lectures, assigning extra problems only she was expected to complete, or giving pop quizzes filled with absurdly difficult questions, he seemed obsessed with finding her breaking point. Yet no matter what he threw at her, Karoline handled it with ease. Her answers were always correct, her logic flawless. Despite the mounting tension, Karoline refused to let Dr. Monroe get under her skin. Instead, she channeled her energy into helping her classmates. During study sessions outside of class, she patiently explained concepts they struggled with, offering tips and tricks to simplify the material. Word spread quickly among students about how generous and knowledgeable she was. Many began seeking her out for help, and soon Karoline became something of a legend, not just for her mathematical prowess, but also for her kindness and humility. Meanwhile, Dr. Monroe grew increasingly frustrated. How could a first-year student outpace even his brightest seniors? Was she cheating somehow? Or worse, was she smarter than him? These thoughts gnawed at him, fueling his determination to break her. But no matter how hard he tried, Karoline remained unshaken. In fact, the harder he pushed, the stronger she seemed to become. Unbeknownst to either of them, their little tug-of-war was starting to attract attention beyond the classroom. Whispers spread throughout the department about the mysterious freshman, who could solve anything, and the stubborn professor who couldn't seem to accept it. Little did they know, this was only the beginning of a story that would change both their lives forever. As the weeks went by, the dynamic between Karoline and Dr. Monroe became the talk of the campus. Students couldn't stop whispering about it in hallways, cafeterias, and even during late-night study sessions. Some admired Karoline's calm demeanor under pressure. Others were baffled by Dr. Monroe's relentless need to challenge her. It wasn't just about math anymore, it felt personal. The professor seemed determined to prove that no one, especially an 18-year-old freshman, could outshine him. But, instead of crumbling, Karoline kept rising to the occasion, solving each problem with precision and confidence. One evening, after another grueling calculus lecture, a group of students gathered outside the classroom to discuss what had just happened. That day, Dr. Monroe had written a particularly nasty differential equation on the board, a problem so complex that even graduate students would have hesitated to tackle it. Without missing a beat, Karoline had walked up and solved it in less than 10 minutes. As the crowd dispersed, one of her classmates turned to her and said, "You're amazing, you know that? He throws these insane problems at you like he's trying to break you, but you just keep crushing it." Karoline smiled faintly, brushing off the compliment. "I'm just doing my best," she replied modestly. "It's not about beating him, or anything. I just like solving problems." Her humility only added to her growing reputation. While Dr. Monroe grew more frustrated with every passing day, Karoline remained unfazed. She didn't see their interactions as battles to win or lose. To her, it was all part of learning, pushing herself to understand concepts deeper, faster, better. And while she never sought recognition, people couldn't help but notice how effortlessly she handled challenges that left others stumped. Word of Karoline's abilities eventually reached the ears of the math department chair, a soft-spoken man named Dr. Lewis. He'd heard rumors about the ongoing showdown in Dr. Monroe's class and decided to investigate for himself. One afternoon, he quietly slipped into the back of the lecture hall, blending in with the students. What he witnessed left him both impressed and intrigued. When Dr. Monroe presented yet another impossibly difficult problem, Karoline calmly stood up, walked to the board, and solved it without hesitation. Her methodical approach and clarity of thought were remarkable, even to someone of Dr. Lewis's experience. After class, Dr. Lewis approached Karoline as she packed up her books. "Excuse me," he said gently, catching her attention. "Do you have a moment?" Karoline looked surprised but nodded. "Of course." Dr. Lewis gestured toward his office down the hall. "Let's chat somewhere quieter." Once inside, he offered her a seat and got straight to the point. "I've been hearing quite a bit about you lately," he began, leaning forward slightly. "And after seeing your work today, I can see why. You have a rare talent, young lady." Karoline shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Thank you, but I don't think I'm anything special. I just enjoy math." Dr. Lewis chuckled softly. "Modesty suits you, but don't sell yourself short. Your skills are extraordinary. In fact, we're hosting a colloquium next month, a gathering of students, faculty, and local mathematicians, and I'd like you to present your solutions there. Think of it as an opportunity to share your insights with a wider audience." Karoline blinked, caught off guard. Public speaking wasn't exactly her strong suit. Sure, she could solve equations on a chalkboard in front of her peers, but presenting to a room full of strangers sounded terrifying. Still, she didn't want to pass up the chance to grow. After a long pause, she nodded slowly. "Okay," she said. "I'll do it." The weeks leading up to the colloquium flew by in a blur of preparation. Karoline spent hours refining her presentation, practicing her explanations until they flowed smoothly. She knew this wasn't just about showcasing her talent. It was about inspiring others. If she could make complex ideas accessible and engaging, maybe she could spark someone else's love for math. On the night of the event, the auditorium buzzed with anticipation. Students, professors, and even a few parents filled the seats, eager to see what the fuss was about. When Karoline stepped onto the stage, clutching a folder of notes, the room fell silent. For a brief moment, she felt her nerves threaten to take over. But then she reminded herself why she was there: to share her passion, not to impress anyone. With a deep breath, she began her presentation. Using clear language and relatable analogies, she broke down intricate calculus problems into digestible pieces. She showed how integrals could model real-world phenomena, from calculating the volume of irregular shapes to predicting population growth. Her enthusiasm was contagious, and soon the audience was hanging on her every word. By the time she finished, the room erupted into applause. People stood to cheer, some even whistling in admiration. Sitting in the back row, Dr. Monroe watched the scene unfold with mixed emotions. On one hand, he couldn't deny that Karoline's presentation was flawless. She'd managed to simplify concepts that many seasoned mathematicians struggled to explain. On the other hand, he couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had been gnawing at him for weeks. Had he underestimated her? Was she truly as brilliant as everyone claimed? After the colloquium ended, several attendees approached Karoline to congratulate her. Some asked questions about her methods. Others simply wanted to thank her for making math feel less intimidating. Amidst the chaos, Dr. Monroe hesitated before finally stepping forward. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his voice unusually subdued. "A word, if you don't mind." Karoline turned to face him, her expression neutral. "Yes, Professor." He glanced around briefly, then motioned for her to follow him to a quieter corner of the room. Once they were alone, he cleared his throat. "I must admit," he began, his tone grudging but sincere, "your performance tonight was impressive. More than impressive, actually. I may have misjudged you." For the first time since the semester began, Karoline saw a flicker of vulnerability in Dr. Monroe's eyes. She nodded slowly, choosing her words carefully. "Thank you, Professor. I appreciate the feedback." There was a long pause before he spoke again. "You have a gift," he said firmly. "Don't waste it." Though his words lacked warmth, Karoline understood their significance. This wasn't just an acknowledgement of her abilities. It was an olive branch. From that moment on, their relationship began to shift. No longer adversaries, they started working together, collaborating on research projects that pushed the boundaries of mathematical exploration. Looking back years later, Karoline would realize that Dr. Monroe's attempts to humiliate her had inadvertently shaped her career. His challenges forced her to dig deeper, think harder, and trust herself more fully. Instead of breaking her spirit, they propelled her toward greatness. Today, she stands as a celebrated mathematician, known not only for her groundbreaking discoveries, but also for her ability to inspire others. And while she might never call Dr. Monroe a friend, she knows that his tough love approach played a crucial role in her journey. Sometimes the people who push us hardest are the ones who help us grow the most. The weeks following the colloquium brought a noticeable change in the atmosphere of Dr. Monroe's calculus class. For one, the tension between him and Karoline seemed to soften, though it didn't disappear entirely. Instead of singling her out with impossible problems during lectures, he began assigning her more advanced material outside of class, extra credit assignments that were optional for others, but mandatory for her. At first, some students whispered among themselves, speculating whether this was another attempt to trip her up, or if their professor had finally recognized her potential. But Karoline didn't see it as either. To her, these assignments were opportunities to explore areas of math she hadn't yet delved into deeply. What surprised everyone, including Karoline herself, was how much she enjoyed tackling these new challenges. The problems Dr. Monroe gave her weren't just about solving equations. They required creativity, critical thinking, and sometimes even collaboration. One day, after handing her a particularly thorny problem involving optimization, he said, "This isn't something you can solve alone. You'll need to work with someone else." It was the closest thing to advice or perhaps encouragement that he'd ever given her. Karoline took his words to heart. She reached out to a senior student who had been attending the same study sessions she led for freshmen. This student, known for their strong grasp of theoretical concepts, initially hesitated when Karoline approached them. "Are you sure you want my help?" they asked, clearly intimidated by her reputation. "I mean, you're the genius here." Karoline laughed softly, shaking her head. "Genius or not, two heads are always better than one. Besides, I could use your perspective on this." Their partnership turned out to be a turning point, not just for Karoline, but for the entire class. As they worked together, bouncing ideas off each other and testing different approaches, their combined insights started producing results neither of them could have achieved alone. When they presented their solution to Dr. Monroe, he didn't offer praise outright, but the slight nod of approval he gave spoke volumes. From then on, he encouraged more group work in class, pairing students based on complementary strengths rather than pitting them against each other. As the semester progressed, Karoline found herself growing not just as a mathematician, but as a person. Her confidence blossomed, not because she was proving herself to Dr. Monroe or anyone else, but because she was discovering what she was truly capable of. She realized that math wasn't just about finding answers. It was about asking questions, exploring possibilities, and embracing uncertainty. Every problem became a puzzle waiting to be unraveled. Every mistake a stepping stone toward understanding. Her newfound enthusiasm spilled over into her interactions with classmates. During study sessions, she no longer focused solely on explaining solutions. Instead, she encouraged others to think critically and experiment with different methods. "There's no one right way to approach a problem," she often reminded them. "Sometimes the wrong turns lead to the most interesting discoveries." This shift in teaching style resonated with her peers. Students who had once dreaded calculus now looked forward to her sessions, eager to learn from her patience and creativity. Even those who struggled with the subject felt less intimidated, knowing that Karoline wouldn't judge them for making mistakes. Slowly but surely, she transformed the way people thought about math and themselves. Meanwhile, Dr. Monroe continued to observe Karoline closely, though his motives had shifted. Where once he saw a challenge to his authority, he now saw potential. He began inviting her to sit in on faculty meetings, introducing her to colleagues working on cutting-edge research projects. At first, Karoline felt out of place among seasoned academics, but she quickly realized that her fresh perspective was valued. Her ability to simplify complex ideas and connect seemingly unrelated concepts impressed even the most skeptical professors. One evening, after a long discussion about nonlinear dynamics, Dr. Monroe pulled her aside. "You've got a gift for bridging gaps," he said, his tone unusually reflective. "Most researchers get lost in the details. You see the bigger picture." Karoline smiled faintly, unsure how to respond. Compliments from Dr. Monroe still felt rare and unexpected. "Thank you," she said simply. "I guess I just try to make things make sense, to me and to others. That's exactly why I'm recommending you for a summer internship at MIT," he added abruptly. Karoline's eyes widened in shock. "MIT? Are you serious?" "Dead serious," he replied, a hint of pride creeping into his voice. "They're looking for someone with your skill set, someone who can communicate complex ideas without losing the audience. Trust me, they'll eat you up." For a moment, Karoline couldn't speak. The idea of spending a summer at one of the world's top institutions felt surreal. But as the initial excitement wore off, doubt crept in. Could she really hold her own among some of the brightest minds in the field? Sensing her hesitation, Dr. Monroe leaned in slightly. "Don't overthink it, just say yes." And so she did. That summer changed everything. At MIT, Karoline immersed herself in a community of thinkers who shared her passion for discovery. She collaborated on projects ranging from climate modeling to cryptography, learning skills and techniques far beyond anything she'd encountered in college. Yet despite the whirlwind of activity, she never forgot where she'd come from, or the professor who had, in his own stubborn way, pushed her to reach for more. When she returned to campus for her sophomore year, Karoline carried with her a renewed sense of purpose. She continued leading study sessions, mentoring younger students, and working alongside Dr. Monroe on increasingly ambitious research projects. Their relationship, once fraught with tension, evolved into a genuine partnership built on mutual respect. Though he still challenged her relentlessly, it was clear that his intentions had shifted. He wasn't trying to break her anymore. He was helping her build. Years later, as Karoline stood on stage accepting an award for her contributions to mathematics, she paused to thank the people who had shaped her journey. Among them, she mentioned Dr. Monroe. "He taught me that growth comes not from comfort but from challenge," she said, her voice steady and sincere. "And while our beginning was rocky, I wouldn't trade it for anything." In the audience, Dr. Monroe sat quietly, his expression unreadable, but as the crowd erupted into applause, a small smile tugged at the corners of his lips. Perhaps, he thought, there was something to be said for letting go of ego and embracing the unknown. After all, sometimes the greatest lessons come not from teaching, but from being taught. By the time Karoline returned from her summer internship at MIT, she wasn't the same person who had left. The experience had opened her eyes to a world far bigger than the small liberal arts college where she'd spent her freshman year. She'd worked alongside brilliant researchers, collaborated on projects that pushed the boundaries of what was possible, and gained a deeper appreciation for how mathematics could solve real-world problems. But more importantly, she'd discovered something about herself. She wasn't just good at math, she belonged in it. When she walked into Dr. Monroe's office early in the fall semester, he looked up from his desk with mild surprise. "Back already?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. Karoline grinned as she took a seat across from him. "Yeah, I figured you might miss me." Dr. Monroe snorted, though there was a flicker of amusement in his eyes. "Don't flatter yourself. I've got plenty of students to keep me busy." Despite his gruff demeanor, Karoline knew he was glad to see her. Over the past year, their relationship had evolved from one of tension to something resembling mentorship. He still challenged her relentlessly, but now it felt less like a test and more like preparation. For what? She wasn't entirely sure. Maybe grad school, maybe a career in academia, or maybe something else entirely. Whatever the case, she trusted him to guide her even if his methods were unconventional. "So," he said, leaning back in his chair, "how was MIT?" "It was incredible," Karoline replied, her voice tinged with excitement. "I learned so much, not just about math, but about teamwork, problem solving, and even failure. There's this one project we worked on involving machine learning algorithms. It didn't go exactly as planned, but figuring out why it failed taught me more than if it had succeeded." Dr. Monroe nodded thoughtfully. "Failure is underrated. Most people avoid it like the plague, but it's where the real growth happens. Sounds like they put you through the ringer." "They did," Karoline admitted, "but it was worth it. I feel like I understand the field better now. Not just the equations, but the people behind them. Math isn't just numbers, it's communication, collaboration, and creativity." Dr. Monroe studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. "You know, when I first met you, I thought you were just another quiet kid who happened to be good at math. But you're not just good at it, you live it. That's rare." Karoline blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. Coming from Dr. Monroe, those words carried weight. "Thanks," she said softly. "That means a lot." He waved a hand dismissively as if embarrassed by his own sincerity. "Don't get used to it. Now let's talk about what's next. You've got potential, but potential doesn't mean anything unless you use it. Have you thought about graduate programs? Research opportunities? Anything?" Karoline hesitated. While she'd considered continuing her education, she hadn't made any concrete plans yet. "I've thought about it," she admitted, "but I'm not sure which path is right." For me, there are so many options. Dr. Monroe nodded knowingly. That's normal. This field is vast and everyone finds their niche eventually. What matters is staying curious and open-minded. In the meantime, I've got a few ideas that might interest you. Over the next hour, they discussed everything from potential research topics to networking strategies. By the end of the meeting, Karoline felt both inspired and overwhelmed. For the first time, she realized just how many doors were opening for her and how much responsibility came with walking through them. As the semester progressed, Karoline threw herself into her studies with renewed energy. She joined a research team working on mathematical models to predict traffic patterns in urban areas, a project that combined her love of math with her desire to make a tangible impact. At the same time, she continued mentoring younger students, helping them navigate the challenges of calculus while encouraging them to pursue their passions. One afternoon, after a particularly productive study session, one of her mentees approached her hesitantly. "Hey, Karoline," the student began, fidgeting with their notebook. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Karoline replied, setting aside her pen. "What's on your mind?" The student hesitated before blurting out, "How do you deal with pressure, like when everyone expects you to be perfect all the time?" Karoline smiled gently, understanding exactly where the question was coming from. When she was a freshman, she'd felt the same way, like every mistake would define her, like she had to prove herself constantly. "First of all," she said, "nobody's perfect. Not me, not Dr. Monroe, not anyone. Second, pressure can be a good thing. It pushes you to grow. But it's important to remember that growth takes time. You don't have to have everything figured out right away." "But what if I mess up?" the student pressed. "What if I disappoint people?" "You will mess up," Karoline said honestly. "And yeah, sometimes people will be disappointed. But here's the thing. The people who matter, the ones who really care about you, they'll stick around. They'll support you because they know you're trying your best. And as for the rest, their opinions don't define you." The student nodded slowly, looking relieved. "Thanks, Karoline, that actually helps a lot." "No problem," Karoline said with a warm smile. "Just promise me one thing. Don't let fear stop you from taking risks. Some of the best things in life come from doing things that scare you." As winter break approached, Karoline found herself reflecting on how much had changed since her freshman year. Back then, she'd been content to stay in the background, letting her work speak for itself. Now she was stepping into leadership roles, pursuing ambitious projects, and inspiring others to follow their dreams. It wasn't always easy. In fact, it was often exhausting, but it was fulfilling in ways she never could have imagined. During a casual conversation with Dr. Monroe one evening, he remarked, "You've come a long way, you know. When I first met you, I thought you were hiding something. Turns out you were just waiting for the right moment to shine." Karoline chuckled. "I wasn't hiding. I was figuring things out. And honestly, I'm still figuring things out. But I think that's okay. Life's a process, right?" Dr. Monroe nodded, a hint of pride in his eyes. "Exactly. Just don't stop pushing yourself. The world needs more people like you." As she left his office that night, Karoline couldn't help but smile. She didn't know what the future held, but she was ready to face it head on. One equation, one challenge, one opportunity at a time. By the time spring semester rolled around, Karoline had become something of a legend on campus. Her name was mentioned in hushed tones during study sessions, whispered about in hallways, and even brought up casually in conversations between professors. It wasn't just her mathematical brilliance that people admired. It was her attitude. She carried herself with a quiet confidence that inspired those around her. Whether she was explaining complex concepts to struggling freshmen or collaborating with seniors on advanced research projects, Karoline had a way of making everyone feel like they mattered. But fame, even within the confines of a small college, came with its own set of challenges. Some students resented her success, convinced she must have some secret advantage. Others idolized her to the point of intimidation, too afraid to approach her for help because they assumed she'd judge them. And then there were the professors who expected perfection from her at every turn, treating her less like a student and more like a peer. or worse, a competitor. Dr. Monroe, however, remained an enigma. While their relationship had softened over the years, it still carried traces of its rocky beginnings. He pushed her harder than anyone else, assigning problems so intricate that even seasoned mathematicians would hesitate to tackle them. Yet, unlike before, his challenges no longer felt like attempts to humiliate her. Instead, they seemed designed to stretch her limits, to force her out of her comfort zone and into uncharted territory. One afternoon, after handing her yet another mind-bending problem involving partial differential equations, he said, "This one's tricky even for you. Don't rush it." Karoline raised an eyebrow, amused by his rare display of caution. "You're not exactly boosting my confidence here, Professor." He smirked faintly. "Confidence is overrated. What you need is resilience. Take your time with this one. It's not about speed, it's about depth." For once, Karoline didn't dive straight into the problem. Instead, she took his advice to heart, spending days poring over textbooks, consulting online resources, and sketching out ideas in her notebook. When she finally arrived at a solution, it wasn't just correct, it was elegant, a masterpiece of logic and creativity. Presenting it to Dr. Monroe felt almost ceremonial, like unveiling a piece of art. "Well?" she asked nervously as he scanned her work, his expression unreadable. After what felt like an eternity, he looked up and nodded, slowly. "Impressive," he said simply, though the slight smile tugging at the corners of his mouth betrayed his satisfaction. "Very impressive." As the weeks went by, Karoline began noticing subtle changes in how others interacted with her. Students who had once avoided her now sought her out, asking for advice not just on math but on life in general. One evening, after a particularly long day of classes and mentoring sessions, a sophomore approached her outside the library. "Hey, Karoline," they said hesitantly, clutching a stack of books. "Do you mind if I ask you something?" "Sure," Karoline replied, gesturing for them to sit beside her on the bench. "What's up?" The student hesitated before blurting out, "How do you stay motivated? Like, when things get tough or boring or, I don't know, pointless?" Karoline tilted her head thoughtfully. It was a question she'd asked herself many times, especially during late-night study sessions filled with frustration and self-doubt. "Honestly," she began, "I think motivation comes from purpose. If you can connect what you're doing to something bigger, whether it's helping someone, solving a real-world problem, or just understanding the world better, it makes the hard parts worth it." "But what if you don't know your purpose yet?" the student countered. "What if you're just lost?" Karoline smiled gently. "That's okay. Everyone feels lost sometimes, including me. The trick is to keep moving forward anyway. Try new things, meet new people, and pay attention to what excites you. Purpose doesn't usually hit you all at once. It builds gradually, piece by piece." The student nodded slowly, looking relieved. "Thanks, Karoline, that actually helps." "No problem," she said warmly. "And remember, it's okay to fail. Sometimes the wrong turns lead to the best places." As the semester drew to a close, Karoline found herself reflecting on how much she'd grown, not just academically but personally. She'd started college as a shy freshman, unsure of where she fit in, and now she was a leader, a mentor, and a trailblazer. But with growth came responsibility, and Karoline couldn't shake the feeling that she was being called to do more, to use her talents not just for personal success but for something greater. One evening, while working on a research paper about using calculus to model renewable energy systems, she received an email from Dr. Monroe. The subject line read, "An opportunity." Intrigued, she opened it immediately. Inside was an invitation to present her findings at a national mathematics conference over the summer. Attached was a note from Dr. Monroe himself. "Thought you might be interested. This could open doors for you." Karoline stared at the screen, her heart racing. A national conference? The idea of presenting her work to hundreds of professionals felt daunting but also exhilarating. Could she really pull it off? She printed out the email and took it to Dr. Monroe's office the next day. "So," she said, holding up the sheet of paper, "you think I'm ready for this?" He glanced up from his desk, raising an eyebrow. Ready? No. But that's never stopped you before? Karoline laughed, though she appreciated his honesty. Fair enough. Any tips? Just be yourself, he replied gruffly. People respond to authenticity. Besides, you've already proven you can handle tough crowds. Over the next few weeks, Karoline threw herself into preparing for the conference. She revised her presentation countless times, practicing in front of friends, professors, and even her reflection in the mirror. By the time the big day arrived, she felt as prepared as she could be, but nothing could have prepared her for the impact it would have. Standing on stage in front of a packed auditorium, Karoline took a deep breath and began speaking. As she explained her research, weaving together theory and application with clarity and passion, she noticed something remarkable happening. The audience was engaged. They weren't just listening, they were leaning forward in their seats, nodding along, scribbling notes. When she finished, the room erupted into applause, louder and longer than she'd ever imagined. Afterward, dozens of attendees approached her to ask questions, share insights, and express admiration for her work. Among them was a prominent researcher from a well-known university who handed her a business card. We should talk, he said with a warm smile. Your ideas could take our team's work to the next level. As Karoline walked back to her hotel that night, clutching the business card tightly, she realized something profound. This wasn't just about her anymore. Her journey wasn't just about proving herself. It was about contributing, connecting, and creating change. For the first time, she truly understood the weight of her potential and the responsibility that came with it. When she returned to campus in the fall, she carried with her not just accolades and connections, but a renewed sense of purpose. Whatever lay ahead, she knew one thing for certain: she was ready to embrace it fully. When Karoline returned to campus after the National Mathematics Conference, she wasn't the same person who had left. The experience had been transformative, not just because of the recognition or connections she'd gained, but because it had clarified something deep within her. For the first time, she saw herself not just as a student or even a mathematician, but as someone with the power to make a difference. Her work wasn't confined to lecture halls or textbooks. It could shape industries, influence policies, and improve lives. The buzz around her success followed her back to school. Students approached her in droves, eager to learn from her experiences. Professors invited her to guest lectures and department meetings, treating her less like a peer and more like an emerging leader in the field. Even Dr. Monroe seemed to regard her differently now, his gruff demeanor softening into something resembling pride. He stopped assigning her extra problems for the sake of challenge and started involving her in real-world projects that mattered. Things like analyzing climate data for local environmental groups or helping design algorithms to optimize public transportation routes. One afternoon, after wrapping up a particularly intense meeting about a new research initiative, Dr. Monroe pulled Karoline aside. "You've got options," he said bluntly, cutting straight to the point. "Grad schools are going to fight over you. Companies will throw money at you. But before you jump into anything, think carefully about what you want." Karoline frowned slightly, caught off guard by the sudden seriousness of his tone. "What do you mean?" "I mean, don't let other people decide your path for you," he replied, leaning against the edge of his desk. "You're at a crossroads, right now. Everyone's watching to see what you'll do next, what choices you'll make, what opportunities you'll take. That kind of attention can be overwhelming, but it can also be empowering if you use it wisely." She nodded slowly, absorbing his words. It was true. She was at a crossroads. On one hand, there were prestigious graduate programs offering full scholarships and promises of groundbreaking research. On the other, there were lucrative job offers from tech companies and consulting firms eager to harness her skills. Each option came with its own allure, but none felt entirely right. She knew she wanted to continue working on projects that made a tangible impact, but beyond that, her vision was still hazy. To clear her mind, Karoline began spending more time outside the classroom. She joined a volunteer tutoring program aimed at underprivileged high school students, many of whom struggled with basic math concepts. At first she worried they might find her intimidating, a college math prodigy swooping in to save the day. But instead they welcomed her warmly, eager to soak up her knowledge and enthusiasm. One evening, after a particularly lively session where she helped a group of juniors tackle algebraic equations, one of the students lingered behind. "Hey, Caroline," they said shyly, fidgeting with their pencil. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Of course," Caroline replied, setting down her notebook. "What's on your mind?" The student hesitated before blurting out, "Do you ever feel like you're supposed to do something big, like you're meant for more than just regular life?" Caroline smiled softly, recognizing the weight behind the question. "All the time," she admitted. "But here's the thing. Big doesn't always mean flashy or famous. Sometimes it's about making small changes that add up over time, like teaching someone how to solve an equation. That might seem small to you, but to them, it could change everything." The student nodded thoughtfully, looking reassured. "Thanks, Caroline, you always know what to say." As Caroline packed up her things and headed home that night, she realized how much these interactions meant to her. Teaching wasn't just about passing on knowledge. It was about inspiring confidence, curiosity, and hope. And maybe, just maybe, that was part of her purpose. Meanwhile, Dr. Monroe continued pushing her to think bigger. During one of their weekly check-ins, he handed her a thick folder filled with papers and charts. "Take a look at this," he said, gesturing for her to sit down. "It's a proposal for a collaborative project between our department and a nonprofit focused on disaster relief. They need help developing predictive models for natural disasters, things like floods, hurricanes, earthquakes. Interested?" Caroline flipped through the materials, her eyes widening as she skimmed the details. "This is incredible," she murmured. "Using math to save lives." "Exactly," Dr. Monroe said, nodding approvingly. "And if anyone can pull it off, it's you." For the next several weeks, Caroline threw herself into the project with unparalleled dedication. She spent long hours poring over data sets, running simulations, and fine-tuning algorithms. When obstacles arose, and they often did, she tackled them head-on, refusing to let frustration slow her down. Slowly but surely, her efforts began paying off. By the end of the semester, she and her team had developed a prototype model capable of predicting flood risks with remarkable accuracy. The nonprofit was thrilled, immediately implementing the model in regions prone to flooding. News of their success spread quickly, drawing attention from media outlets and academic journals alike. Soon, Caroline found herself giving interviews, writing articles, and presenting her findings at conferences across the country. Yet despite the growing recognition, she remained grounded, focusing not on accolades but on the lives her work was impacting. As graduation loomed closer, Caroline faced another wave of decisions. Acceptance letters from top-tier universities flooded her inbox, each accompanied by glowing testimonials and generous funding packages. Job offers poured in too, ranging from Silicon Valley startups to global consulting firms. Everyone seemed eager to claim her as their own, but none of the options felt quite right. One evening, while sitting alone in her dorm room, she pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas. What did she truly want? What would fulfill her? Not just professionally but personally. As she wrote, a pattern emerged. Over and over again, she circled back to themes of community, collaboration, and impact. She didn't want to isolate herself in a lab or chase corporate profits. She wanted to be part of something meaningful, something that brought people together to solve problems that mattered. By the time she closed her notebook, the answer was clear. She would defer graduate school for a year and join the nonprofit, full-time, dedicating herself to expanding their disaster relief initiatives. It wasn't the most glamorous choice nor the most lucrative, but it aligned perfectly with her values and aspirations. When she shared her decision with Dr. Monroe, he raised an eyebrow skeptically. "Are you sure about this? You could go anywhere, to anything. Why choose this?" "Because it matters," Caroline replied simply. "Because it's bigger than me." Dr. Monroe studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. "Well," he said gruffly, If anyone can change the world, it's you. As Karoline walked away from his office that day, she felt a sense of peace wash over her. For so long, she'd been searching for direction, for validation, for proof that she belonged. Now, she no longer needed any of those things. She knew who she was, what she stood for, and where she was headed. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them, not just for herself, but for everyone counting on her to make a difference. Karoline's first year working with the nonprofit was a whirlwind of challenges, triumphs, and moments that tested her in ways she'd never imagined. On paper, her role sounded straightforward. Use mathematics to predict natural disasters and help communities prepare for them. But in practice, it was anything but simple. She quickly learned that solving equations was only half the battle. The other half involved understanding people, navigating bureaucracy, and dealing with the unpredictable nature of real-world problems. Her days were long and often exhausting. Mornings began with meetings, sometimes with scientists poring over data, sometimes with local leaders trying to grasp how math could save lives. Afternoons were spent running simulations, tweaking models, or troubleshooting technical glitches. Evenings were reserved for reflection, jotting down ideas in her ever-present notebook and preparing for whatever lay ahead the next day. Despite the grueling schedule, Karoline thrived. Every setback became a lesson, every success a reminder of why she'd chosen this path. One project stood out above the rest, a collaboration with a coastal town prone to devastating floods. The community had been hit hard by hurricanes in recent years, leaving residents anxious and distrustful of outsiders promising solutions. When Karoline arrived, armed with charts, graphs, and an earnest smile, she wasn't greeted with open arms. Instead, skepticism hung heavy in the air during their first meeting. "Why should we trust you?" one resident asked bluntly, folding his arms across his chest. "We've heard promises before, and look where it got us." Karoline nodded, unfazed. "I get it," she said calmly. "You've been let down, and I can't change what happened in the past. All I can do is show you what's possible now. My team and I are here to listen, to learn from your experiences and work together to find solutions that actually make sense for your community." Her honesty disarmed them. Over the following weeks, she immersed herself in their world, walking through neighborhoods, talking to families, and learning firsthand how floods had impacted their lives. Slowly but surely, trust began to build. By the time she presented her flood prediction model, a tool designed not just to warn, but to empower residents to act, she wasn't just another outsider. She was part of the conversation. When the model successfully predicted a minor flood months later, giving the town enough time to evacuate safely, the gratitude in the room was palpable. One elderly woman approached Karoline after the emergency drills concluded, tears glistening in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, gripping Karoline's hand tightly. "You saved my grandson. He would have been caught in that water if we hadn't known." Karoline felt a lump rise in her throat. For all the equations she'd solved and accolades she'd received, nothing compared to the raw humanity of that moment. This was why she did what she did, not for recognition but for moments like these. As word of her work spread, invitations poured in from other communities facing similar threats, from drought-stricken villages in Africa to earthquake-prone regions in Asia. Karoline traveled the globe, sharing her expertise and adapting her models to fit unique challenges. Each trip taught her something new, not just about math, but about resilience, adaptability, and the universal desire to protect loved ones. But no matter how far she went, she never forgot where she came from. During breaks between projects, she returned to her alma mater, leading workshops and mentoring students eager to follow in her footsteps. She encouraged them to dream big, but reminded them that true fulfillment came from serving others. "Find your purpose," she often told them, "and when you do, pour everything you have into it." Dr. Monroe remained a constant presence in her life, offering guidance whenever she needed it. Their relationship had evolved into something resembling friendship, though neither would admit it outright. One evening, after a particularly long day of teaching, They found themselves sitting side by side on a bench outside the math building. "You know," Dr. Monroe said gruffly, staring at the horizon. "When I first met you, I thought you were just another smart kid. Turns out you're something else entirely." Karoline chuckled softly. "Thanks, I think." He glanced at her, a rare smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "Don't let it go to your head. You've still got a lot to learn." "And you'll still be around to teach me, right?" she teased. "Unfortunately for both of us," he replied dryly, though there was warmth in his tone. Years passed, and Karoline's legacy continued to grow. Her models became standard tools for disaster relief organizations worldwide, saving countless lives and preventing billions in damage. Yet despite her global influence, she remained grounded, always prioritizing connection over accolades. Whether speaking at international conferences or visiting small towns ravaged by storms, she carried herself with the same humility and determination that had defined her journey from the start. Looking back, she realized how much she owed to those who had shaped her along the way: the high school teachers who nurtured her love for math, the classmates who pushed her to collaborate, and yes, even Dr. Monroe, whose tough love approach had forced her to dig deeper than she ever thought possible. Without them, she might have stayed comfortable, content to solve problems in isolation rather than stepping into the messy, beautiful chaos of the real world. On the night of her induction into the National Academy of Sciences, a Lifetime Achievement Award recognizing her contributions to mathematics and society, Karoline took a moment to reflect. As she stood on stage, accepting the honor with quiet grace, she scanned the audience. There were colleagues, friends, and mentors scattered throughout the crowd, each playing a part in her story. And then, near the back, she spotted Dr. Monroe, clapping politely but visibly proud. When the ceremony ended and the applause faded, Karoline stepped off stage to find him waiting for her. "Well," he said, raising an eyebrow, "looks like you finally made it." She smiled, shaking her head. "I couldn't have done it without you." For once, Dr. Monroe didn't brush off the compliment. Instead, he placed a hand on her shoulder, his expression softening. "You did good, kid. Real good." As they walked out together into the cool night air, Karoline felt a deep sense of gratitude, not just for the accolade, but for the winding, unpredictable journey that had brought her here. Life, she realized, wasn't about perfection or easy answers. It was about embracing challenges, leaning on others when needed, and finding meaning in the process. And as long as she kept doing that, she knew she'd continue making a difference. One equation, one community, one life at a time.